On a packed flight, a group of young men mocked an elderly black man, demanding his window seat and calling him old man. What they didn't realize was that he was a Vietnam veteran who had faced far worse. What happened next left everyone stunned. Stay with us to witness a story of courage, dignity, and an unforgettable comeback. Subscribe now for more stories that challenge prejudice and inspire change. And while you're here, let us know where you're watching from. The afternoon flight from New York to Dallas was nearly full as passengers filed into their assigned seats. The cabin buzzed with activity, families settling in, business travelers typing on laptops, and flight attendants moving briskly down the aisle. In seat 14A, Clarence Bennett sat quietly by the window. In his early 70s, Clarence had a steady presence and a kind but weathered face. Wearing a plain brown jacket and holding a worn paperback book, Clarence preferred to stay out of the spotlight. He glanced out the window as the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the tarmac. Behind him, the loud laughter of Brad Carter and Dylan Hayes echoed through the cabin. The two young men, both in their early 20s, had boarded the plane together, cracking jokes and shoving each other as they made their way to their seats. As Brad and Dylan approached row 14, Brad noticed Clarence sitting by the window. His grin widened as he nudged Dylan and whispered, "Watch this." Brad leaned over Clarence's seat and said loudly, "Hey, old man, how about you switch seats with me? I want the window." Clarence looked up from his book, his expression calm. "Sorry, son, but I'd prefer to stay here." Brad's grin faded slightly. "Come on, don't be selfish. You're too old to care about the view anyway." Clarence raised an eyebrow, his voice steady but firm. "I paid for this seat. I think I'll stay." Brad's frustration turned to arrogance as he leaned back, his voice carrying over the low hum of the plane's engines. "You know it's not that big of a deal, old man. You're just sitting there like it's the last window seat on Earth." Clarence didn't respond immediately, flipping a page of his book as though he hadn't heard. But Brad wasn't letting it go. "Seriously, what's so special about sitting by the window? You're probably just going to nap the whole flight anyway." Dylan laughed, adding fuel to the fire. "Yeah, leave the view for someone who'll appreciate it. You probably can't even see that far anymore." "Huh." A few passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably. Some glanced at Clarence with sympathy, but no one intervened. The silence of the onlookers only emboldened Brad and Dylan further. Brad leaned forward, lowering his voice but keeping his mocking tone. "Don't make me call the flight attendant to move you. You really want to make this harder than it has to be?" Clarence closed his book slowly, setting it on his lap. His calm demeanor didn't waver, but his grip on the armrest tightened slightly. He turned his gaze out the window, taking a deep breath to steady himself. The two men laughed again, confident in their ability to intimidate. Dylan nudged Brad. Maybe he's hard of hearing. "Hey, Grandpa, did you hear us? We're talking to you." Clarence glanced around the cabin, noting the averted eyes of other passengers. He saw a young mother pulling her child closer, pretending not to notice, and a business traveler typing furiously on his laptop, clearly avoiding the scene. "They'll let this slide if I let it slide," Clarence thought, but someone has to set them straight. His fingers brushed against the edge of his jacket, feeling the familiar fabric that covered a story these young men couldn't begin to understand. Clarence knew he couldn't stay silent. Not this time. He adjusted his posture, sat a little straighter, and prepared to respond. "They'll learn," he thought. "Today, they'll learn." Clarence folded his jacket neatly over his lap and turned to face Brad and Dylan. "Boys," Clarence began, his tone calm but commanding. "Let me tell you something about this seat and why I'm staying right here." Brad smirked, but Clarence didn't flinch. He unzipped his jacket and removed it, revealing the edges of a patch sewn onto his shirt, a patch that caught the attention of nearby passengers. "I served in Vietnam," Clarence said. "I fought in the jungle under conditions you can't imagine so people like you could sit wherever you want on a plane." The patch on his shirt, paired with a glimpse of medals pinned to his undershirt, made Brad and Dylan freeze. Clarence continued, his voice steady and unwavering. "I've earned this seat, and I'm not giving it up. Not to you or anyone else who thinks they're entitled to something they didn't work for. The cabin was eerily quiet as Clarence's words resonated through the space. Passengers leaned in closer, their attention locked on the unfolding scene. Brad shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable but too prideful to fully back down. He attempted a weak laugh. "Look, man, we didn't mean anything by it. Just messing around." Clarence didn't flinch. His voice remained steady, carrying a weight that silenced Brad's nervous chuckle. "Messing around? Huh," Clarence said, his gaze unwavering. "Let me tell you something about the cost of your so-called jokes. I've seen real battles. Son, I've fought for freedoms you take for granted. And one thing I've learned is that respect is earned, not demanded." He opened his jacket fully, revealing the intricate patch of his battalion and the glint of a metal pinned beneath his shirt. Gasps rippled through the cabin as passengers realized the depth of the man they had overlooked. Clarence continued, his tone calm but resolute. "That seat by the window? I earned it, just like I earned the right to stand my ground when someone tries to take what's mine, be it on a battlefield or on this plane." Brad's face turned red as the weight of Clarence's words began to sink in. Dylan's eyes darted nervously around the cabin, looking for an escape from the piercing stares of the other passengers. At that moment, Rachel Torres, the young flight attendant who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "Mr. Bennett," she said respectfully, addressing Clarence, "thank you for your service. Is there anything I can get you to make your flight more comfortable?" Clarence gave her a polite nod. "No, thank you. I'm just fine where I am." Rachel turned her attention to Brad and Dylan, her professional demeanor hardening. "Gentlemen, I suggest you return to your assigned seats immediately. This behavior is unacceptable, and any further disruptions will be reported to the captain." A smattering of applause broke out from nearby passengers, growing louder as more people joined in. Brad and Dylan, now visibly humiliated, muttered half-hearted apologies as they shuffled past Clarence and returned to their seats. Clarence adjusted his jacket, his calm and composed manner showing no sign of triumph, just quiet dignity. His actions had spoken louder than any insult or retaliation ever could. As the plane took off, several passengers stopped by Clarence's seat to thank him for his service. A young boy from a nearby row shyly approached, pointing to Clarence's medals. "Were you really in a war?" the boy asked. Clarence smiled warmly, adjusting his shirt so the boy could see the medals more clearly. "Yes, I was. And I learned that respect is something you give freely, not something you demand." From their seats, Brad and Dylan exchanged uneasy glances. For the rest of the flight, they kept their heads down, too ashamed to speak. As the plane landed in Dallas, Clarence stood and adjusted his jacket, his quiet dignity leaving a lasting impression on everyone in the cabin. Subscribe now for more inspiring stories of courage, respect, and justice. Have you ever met someone who taught you a lesson in humility? Share your story in the comments.